Welcome to episode 792 of Car Con Carne. The show today, whenever you're listening, is sponsored by SopelSolar.com, S-O-P-E-L, solar.com. I'm recording this the first week of November, which means the year is kind of winding down, which seems astonishing to say, but now is the time to go solar. Take advantage of the tax credits that are floating out there. Get those panels on your home before the weather becomes inclement, shall we say. It costs nothing out of pocket, and you can increase the value of your home automatically. The second those things are up, your home value is already improved. Nothing out of pocket. The consultation is free. Let my friend Brent Sopel help you achieve cost certainty.
It's Car Con Carne. Let's eat in the car. It's Car Con Carne. And now here's the star of our show, James Van Alstyne.
Car Con Carne, also sponsored by 90 Days in the 90s, a rock and roll time travel story. It is the ultimate novel about the 90s and Chicago's music scene. I was there. Maybe you were there. If you weren't, you can go back in time and relive the 90s in Chicago. That is the whole idea of this book, 90 Days in the 90s, written by Andy Fry. You can join record store owner Darby as she takes a trip back to the 90s. She takes the gray line back in time to time travel to those carefree, amazing days that were filled with music memories, pop culture memories. 90daysinthe90s.com.
Are you using the video or not using the video? Is it just for reference or are you using it? It doesn't matter. I'm just curious.
I'd like to, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. All good.
I mean, yeah, you're so photogenic, it would be wrong not to.
Well, and then I'll raise a toast to you, sir. So here we go.
Cheers. I wish I had something to
You
drink.
can sort of, you can fist bump. It's like,
yeah,
boom.
Right on, bro. There you go. Okay. So if you're cool, we'll begin.
Baby, I'm always cool. Let's do it.
My guest tonight, right now, it is Frank Meyer. He's an award-winning director, producer, author, and musician. His band, Streetwalkin Cheetahs, recorded over 10 albums, appeared on over 100, that doesn't even seem right, 100 compilations, soundtracks, and tribute albums, and picked up a lot of kick-ass press along the way. Frank is here. He's enjoying a cocktail, as he should. It's nighttime. He deserves an adult beverage.
Sure.
I mean, why not?
Sure. Yeah.
Frank, I've interviewed bands a lot through the years, and the cardinal rule is you never ask a band who their influences are. That always seems kind of like a cliche, crutchy kind of thing to do. Although I feel like with Streetwalkin Cheetahs, you've always worn them on your sleeve, and with this new release, like it's kind of hard not to.
Yeah, I mean, I think my whole career has sort of been like saluting my idols and my influences, and then sort of taking, all these things that I enjoy and putting them into Blender, and that's the music I make. So with this new Cheetahs record, the Streetwalkin Cheetahs, all the covers and more, it's literally a collection of all the covers we did between when the band formed in 1995, and our very first demo featured us like a 4-track cassette demo doing a mix of covers and originals. And really early on, we teamed up with people like Cherie Currie from the Runaways and Wayne Kramer from the MC5 and Sylvain from the New York Dolls, and kind of started, sort of doubling as their backing band, but also like talking them into doing remakes of their songs or guesting on our material, just whatever we could pull off. We, like you said, we always wore influences pretty well on our sleeves. So this new album makes a lot of sense. At the same time, that's why we're called the Streetwalkin Cheetahs, is that like we started and we were playing, Runaways and Stooges covers. So like Streetwalkin Cheetah with the Heart Full of Napalm, that's the opening line in Search and Destroy. And one of the first rehearsals we ever did, we played Black to Calm by the MC5 and Cherry Bomb by the Runaways and Search and Destroy. Mm-hmm. And then it sounded good. And after a few rehearsals, we were like, let's book a gig. But we didn't really know what we were yet, but we knew that we were doing all these awesome covers. And we're like, well, anyone that figures out what the Streetwalkin Cheetahs even means is going to kind of know what we're all about. And if they don't, fuck them. And they just think we're like some no-name band and, blah, blah, blah. And, which we were at the time, until Cherie Currie from the Runaways came and saw us really early on and jumped up on stage and sang Cherry Bomb. And then did this single that's now like the lead single, on our new record, but was also a single we put out back in the 90s of us doing Cherry Bomb with Cherie. So it all goes full circle. And to answer your original question, yeah, I mean, our influences are pretty clearly the Stooges and the MC5 and the Dead Boys and the Runaways. But I think Cheap Trick is a big one.
100%.
We're really big power pop fans. So we really dig those songs that like have like great like hard edge riffs and then really melodic vocals. That's kind of like my go-to thing,
Well, I'm glad you said Cheap Trick, and we'll talk about the fact that Cheap Trick is covered and represented here a couple times on this compilation. I've got one more drink behind me. You can see the vinyl perched over my right shoulder. I mean, Ain't It Summer off that album just sounds like that is total Cheap Trick.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few songs that we have that in my mind as the guy that wrote or co-wrote those songs, like that song and Lookout and December in a Day, and those are songs covering several decades of the band, but those are like overt Cheap Trick sort of salutes, you know what I mean? Like I'm not even like trying to pretend, like I'm being like, this is me doing my take on the Cheap Trick sound. And they're along with the Ramones and Van Halen with David Lee Roth and the Go-Go's and Joan Jett. I mean, those are some of the like primordial influences for me, not necessarily all the rest of the guys, although they all love those bands, but we each have, the bands that like made us play music in the first place. And for me, Cheap Trick was for sure one of those bands where like, that was what got me addicted to listening to the radio was Cheap Trick. Like every time I heard Surrender or She's Tight or If You Want My Love, You Got It, I was just like, oh my God. I would just like sit waiting for them to come on the radio,
growing up in Illinois and hearing all those songs on the radio.
You're a Chicago guy, Yeah, I mean, that's
just the idea as a kid, like those guys are from the same state as me. Those guys are like drivable from where I live. It blew my young mind.
And also to me, the thing that was cool, like when I first got into music, there were bands that were sort of like untouchably great and grand, like Van Halen with David Lee Roth was grand. It was big. Zeppelin was big. Aerosmith was big. Yeah. The Sex Pistols, even for all of their sort of ramshackleness, like when you saw those pictures, they looked like a big force of nature. But like the Ramones and the Runaways and Cheap Trick to me looked a lot more like normal people. You know what I mean? Like you'd look at photos, and this is back before the internet. You would look at photos of these bands and you kind of just, and again, some of these bands are before my time. Like I wasn't, I'm a kid more of the 80s, and I grew up in the 70s, but I was a little kid back then. By the time I was listening to music, it was like the early 80s. So I was like listening to the radio when like early Joan Jett and the Go-Go's and the first Motley Crue record and Van Halen Diver Down, like 82 maybe, was sort of when I first was like, oh my God, this music, like the Knack My Sharona, Oh Mickey by Tony Basil. That was, Kids in America by Kim Carnes. That was the stuff that kind of made me go like Kim Wilde. Yeah. Kim Carnes was Betty Davis eyes. Yes. But yeah, good call. But that was the stuff that kind of made me go from like kid with the radio on in the background to like, oh my God, this music it means so much to me. And then I heard Van Halen, and that was the thing that really made me go like, I've got to pick up this guitar and figure out how to do that thing that I'm hearing. Cause like that was sort of what got me started as a musician, not necessarily as a kid that liked rock, but as a musician that wanted to learn an instrument. It was the Van Halen stuff. But even that was so untouchably beyond my capabilities as a 13-year-old.
Sure.
It sort of took the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and T-Rex and the New York Dolls. That was sort of what made me start a band, because like even Van Halen and even the idea of trying to play guitar like seemed so kind of still untouchable as a dream. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to try playing this guitar, but like, it's not going to go well. And I can't do all this tapping stuff. But like, Eddie Van Halen Eruption was like the thing back in the day, and you had to learn how to like tap and do whammy bars and all these like tricks. And I was like, I can't do that stuff. But then I heard the New York Dolls and the Ramones, and I was like, oh, I can do that. Like that's just 3 chords, and that's E, A, B. I know those. And so that kind of got me started in like, I could form a garage band. And then I just kept aiming for trying to sort of be like the best musician I could within the context of this music that I enjoyed, which was really kind of just simple rock. And, here we are 30 something, years later, and to some extent, my whole sound is still based on that primordial, T-Rex, Hanoi Rocks, New York Dolls. Like I've done all these other records, and I've like metal bands and country stuff with Eddie Spaghetti and James Williamson, and all this sort of wide range of material. But like when left to my own devices, I'm kind of making the same music that I was making the very first time I picked up a guitar, which is like Aerosmith meets Kiss meets Sex Pistols meets T-Rex meets New York Dolls, Hanoi Rocks. Like that's my jam.
And I think we have all the same cultural touchstones.
And Cheap Trick, of course, which is where this whole thing. So, Cheap Trick to me is where it begins, ends, and they're my Beatles, honestly. And this is a terrible statement to make if you're a classic rock fan. I like the Beatles more than I like Cheap Trick, and even Cheap Trick would disagree with that statement. They go, "You're out of your mind because we're only here because of the Beatles," and I agree with that statement. Like I'm not discounting the majesty of the Beatles, but for me and my taste and my ears, I like Cheap Trick's harder take on that Beatles influence than I even like the fucking Beatles. And I know that's sacrilegious, but goddamn it, I'm going to stick to it.
Well, God, those first few albums, the self-titled one, Heaven Tonight,
listen,
Color.
Homer Simpson said, he goes, "I prefer the music of Cheap Trick."
and you're talking about the way they looked, as Van Halen. They're almost like cartoon mythical gods, Van Halen and Zeppelin. Cheap Trick, you had the handsome guys,
the two cute guys, and then the nerds,
and then the guys who look like they could be working at a shoe store,
or a
Bunny
librarian.
Carlos. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that was and that's actually why when I mentioned the kind of Ramones connection, is that like some of those bands. And we love these bands, but like Hanoi Rocks, the Pistols, Aerosmith, these bands look so perfectly cool. Cheap Trick, like two guys looked cool, and the other two looked like guys that I hung out with, or like their dads. Like they looked like normal dudes. Their whole look to me, and the way that their whole thing to me was very approachable, and their music, while very sophisticated, is also very simple, much like the Ramones and a lot of great music and a lot of Beatles and a lot of Stones. It's like you can kind of strum through it in like 3 or 4 or 5 chords, but then as you start to learn the details and the intricacies, you're like, whoa, this is some heavy stuff. There's a lot going on here,
One thing it was kind of a reawakening or a relearning for me about the Ramones, and I do love the Ramones. In fact, one of the loudest concerts I ever saw was the Ramones at the Riviera in Chicago.
Well, I wrote a book called On the Road with the Ramones. I've written 8 books, and the first book I wrote was called On the Road with the Ramones, and it was with Monty Melnick, who was their tour manager, and we interviewed like every person in the Ramones camp at that time. And that's definitely, I wrote that book up for a lot of reasons, and one of them is because the Ramones are huge for me,
One relearning for me, Record Store Day, 1 or 2 Record Store Days ago, they had the re-releases of all the Ramones 80s stuff as like a box set, and I had to listen to those records for a while.
So good.
They get dismissed. There's a ton of good stuff in there.
The Ramones really never made a bad record. There's definitely spottier records, and maybe when you get into the 90s, but like they're all really good. The ones with CJ are really good. The stuff in the 80s is really good. Like, Howlin' at the Moon, Mama's Boy, that stuff. That stuff's killer. I really like a lot of that stuff a lot. And the stuff with Richie Ramone sometimes gets slagged a little bit, but like I feel like Joey and Johnny, when they wrote songs together, and especially when Dee Dee got in the mix, like they didn't write bad songs. There's no real bad Ramone songs. They're all great.
As far as the 90s go with Mondo Bizarro, I think Poison Heart is as good a single as they ever wrote.
All those albums with all those later records are really, really solid. And the Acid Eaters, the covers record towards the end is really, really good. Like I feel like CJ brought a lot of energy and a lot of sort of punk rockness to them at a time when, maybe Johnny and Joey weren't communicating as much, and CJ was sort of like the middle ground. Like they all kind of were able to sort of deal with each other through his love and energy. It's like Van Halen when Wolfgang joined. You know what I mean? It's like Dave and Eddie did not particularly get along, but Wolfie, I feel like, had so much energy and genuine love and passion, not just for his dad, but for the music, and like a respect for what Dave brought. Maybe a respect for what Dave brought that even Eddie and Alex maybe didn't quite have their heads wrapped around at that time. Like obviously they know what Dave's worth, but I feel like Wolfgang came in with this fresh perspective, the way that CJ did, was like, yeah, you guys don't get it, man. This is what people love. We got to do this. Like, we got to bring it back to this thing, and sometimes you need that. Like, I mean, I just, believe it or not, I just got off the Kiss cruise.
Oh, wow.
I did 5 days on the road at the Kiss cruise. Me and Amit Zappa went because we're working on a project together that involved going on the Kiss cruise. Long story. He and I go way back, and there's a lot of our adventures where you'd go, wait, what? Why are we doing that? I go, listen, man, long story. We go way back. We do crazy shit. But Amit and I were on the Kiss cruise, and that's a band that, as much as I hate to admit it, like when they brought in Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer, who replaced and even wore the makeup, which many people found to be sacrilegious, but they wore the makeup of Ace Frehley and Peter Criss, the Catman and the Spaceman. And even myself, and I'm a big fan of Tommy Thayer. He was in a band called Black and Blue, who I really like a lot. And so I was not hating on him joining Kiss. But, like the idea of them wearing the makeup, at first I was like, I don't know. But then I went and saw them with those guys, and dude, they were so much better than when I saw the reunited Kiss in the mid 90s with Ace and Peter. These guys play that stuff note for note, spot on, tons of energy. They're bringing in this youthful vibe that Paul and Gene seem to really like feed off of. And the couple records they made with those guys are really solid, sort of throwbacks to the 70s. And I'm all about it, man. If you're going to keep the band going, then keep the band going. You know what I mean?
Totally
don't be an oldies act. Like, I don't mean like reinvent yourself. I mean, still give the people what they want. But if you need to sub out a few guys to just sort of keep this thing happening, like, I get it, man. And in the case of Kiss, I feel like it was the right move, and it bought them like another couple decades.
Well, and Alice Cooper does the same thing. He's got young people keeping him.
Absolutely. In fact, I saw Alice and Ace recently, and Ace was not so great, and Alice was absolutely like a master class in showmanship, musicianship, performance. He sang great. The band was great. It's a rotating cast of killer players. The last time I saw him a few years back before COVID, he had a slightly different tweak on the band. That band was killer. Like, guys, he's just, he's killer. To me, he's right under the Stones, and you know what I mean, in terms of like, you go and see an Alice Cooper show, you are seeing an A-list killer. There's
100%.
But you're also seeing a real band playing real music. Like, meaning you can go see a fun arena band, but like 9 times out of 10, it's all they're playing to like, pre-recorded tracks and stuff. Right. And I don't even hate on that. I'm just saying, like, a lot of times you're not seeing the band. But when you see the Stones, like, other than a few, like, there's some elements that, a couple, like, maybe percussive, few little things. If they're playing 2,000 miles from home, there might be some keyboards flown in. But like, for the most part, you're getting the Stones and their backing band, which at this point is huge, playing those songs. When you go and see, when I went and saw Kiss on this cruise, it was the 4 guys. Like, yeah, there were a few bum notes. So what? It was killer.
Right.
99% of what they played it killer.
That's awesome. All right. So all the covers and more is the new compilation. See, I was worried we get too far.
I know. We just went down this hole. I mean, we could just talk forever.
For sure. So 38 total covers dating back to the inception of the Streetwalkin Cheetahs. I've got to think mastering this was a nightmare just because of all the different sources.
Well, not for me, because I farmed that out to other people. But for Lou from Rumbar Records, who was kind enough to put this out, it had to have been a nightmare, because a lot of stuff, there's a handful of tracks that came from albums, because along the line we were, on some albums we would put on covers, and then there's like some singles we did, like the stuff with Cherie Curry and the stuff with Dennis Tech. Those were like singles that came out on Bomp Records back in the day, and so some of that stuff was already mastered. But then we also had like 4-track cassette demos of the original lineup of the band, with my brother Brecken on drums right before his acting career took off. And then we've got like unreleased stuff that came from ADATs and DATs, and then a couple things where they were from vinyl and compilations where I didn't even have the masters, so we had to master them off the vinyl.
Right.
So like, it was a nightmare. But again, that's why you hire a professional team around you, so that I personally don't have to deal with every single detail.
I have a bunch of my old interviews from the 90s on DATs, and I feel like,
dude, Me too.
It's a race against the clock before they completely disintegrate.
Listen, I'm sitting here right now. When we finish this interview, I bought a 4-track cassette player recently because I've got all these old school, including a lot of Cheetah stuff, 4-track cassettes, and I have no way to really offload them and to properly. I mean, honestly, because I have all the masters, but to properly store it, what you need to do is track at a time, run it into your computer, and you know what I mean. But like that means a half an hour long demo is actually 2 hours long because it's 4 times the length because you blah blah blah. It's a fucking nightmare. But that being said, like, who else is going to do it but me? And I was the guy in the band, you know, me and Dino from the band. We started the band, and, you know, going back to your original question, like, we're music nerds like you. Like, when we started this band, like, we knew, like, hold on to everything. If we do a 4-track, hold on. Because we figured just like we would collect Johnny Thunders records and Gigi Allen and Iggy Pop and all those, like, cult artists, you know, that where there'd be like 30 records on a French label that didn't even, you're like, what? How? Like, I love Johnny Thunders. Where did all these come from on, like, you know, this Revenge Records or whatever? You'd start going down this path, and you know, realize there was all these like bootlegs and official bootlegs, and then when torrenting started, there was like torrenting. So we're nerds like that. So along the way, we saved everything, and anytime we jammed with anyone famous or anyone cool, we made sure we had some tape of it. And now, you know, I mean, I didn't even touch that stuff forever because I'm always kind of moving forward. As you know, I play in like 12 bands, and I'm doing a record with Eddie Spaghetti and a record with James Williamson. And, you know, I got this band in Copenhagen, Training Aces, and my blues band, Highway 61. But at the same time, at some point, I was like, you know, like this covers record made me kind of go like, man, I got so much stuff sitting on cassettes and ADATs and DATs, and like now that I'm in archival mode, now's the time. So I'm starting to go through it all. Let me just give you an idea of how deep and insane this goes. In the around 95, 96, I played in the Schoolhouse Rock touring band with Bob DeRoe and Jack Sheldon and Denny Sidewell and all of the original members and performers and vocalists who did Schoolhouse Rock. And I was the vocalist and guitar player at times. And I even brought Cherie Currie into the mix, and she sang Suffer Until Suffrage, the song about the women's suffrage movement from the singer of the Runaways, which no one else, you know, I was like, we got to do this. So ironic. Bob was like, well, I don't know who the Runaways are, but that sounds cool if you like it, Frank. And like, we did this whole thing. And recently, just going down, you know, all the covers and more, putting together the Cheetahs record made me start kind of like, I had to pull up some of the stuff from the 4-track demos, and I realized like, oh my God, I have all these soundboard tapes and 4-tracks, and I started going through it. Dude, I've got 3 soundboard Schoolhouse Rock Live full shows.
Oh my God.
With Bob DeRoe, who's now, rest in peace, he's not with us anymore. It's him, it's Jack Sheldon from, you know, who's like this famous actor, trumpet player, Denny Sidewell from Wings, the drummer of Wings, on drums, me, Cherie Currie, Insanity. And I've got all this stuff, and I'm now just starting to like archive it and figure out what to do with it all.
Oh my God. All right. So some of the songs you cover, I mean, this is the itch I didn't realize I needed scratched. I mean, you've got you cover X, you perfectly conjure up John Doe. I love the Xene part on that. The Get Out. I love the way that.
Well, Dino does John Doe on that, and I do Exene because he's got that natural baritone like John Doe. And I, you know, my voice, I can kind of do whatever, especially now. Like when I started, I just kind of had like 1 or 2 ranges I could do, but I've been singing for a long time now, and I've sort of gotten to a point where, and I'm not saying this like egotistically, I'm just saying like, this is my instrument. Like I'm a pretty good guitar player. I've become a really good singer in the sense that I feel like my range on guitar, there's a lot more things on guitar that I can't do. Whereas a vocalist, there's not a lot I can't do. Like I've done plays now. I've done Schoolhouse Rock tours. I've sang with Petra Haden when I sang with James Williamson. I've done stuff with Thor, or, you know, heavy metal guys where I've sang in like a full fucking, you know, super high register for the whole song, not in falsetto, like real, you know, head voice kind of stuff. But like, you know, like I took vocal lessons over the years. Like I know how to use my voice as a tool, as a weapon. The throat, to me, is an effects pedal. It's like a distortion pedal. So like I choose whether I want to sound distorted or not, You know, don't get me wrong. You sing long enough, you're just going to start to get distortion on your voice because you'll blow it out. But like generally, if I'm in a good vocal form, like it's all sort of choices now, and I can kind of choose like, oh, here's that point where my voice, you know, I could go into a falsetto and jump up an octave, or I could stay in head voice and jump up an octave. So now which tone do I want, as opposed to the ability of jumping up to the note? Whereas for years and years, I couldn't get it. I was just kind of a tenor. Yeah, I was a tenor with a little bit of baritone. And now I'd say I'm just like, I pretty much, I mean, there's some stuff I can't do, but for the most part, I could pretty much kind of sing anything for the most part.
You mentioned Aerosmith at the beginning of our conversation.
One of my favorite singers ever, and another guy that can sing, and Robin Zander too. Anything.
Oh, for sure.
You know, well, just like way high, way low, in the middle. It's always, and those are my idols. That's why I try to sing good. It's just so I can be like that, you know.
Does Draw the Line have one of the greatest riffs in rock history? Discuss.
It does, and it also has one of the coolest vocal things ever. Because you know, there was a long time when like Axl Rose and you know, Cinderella, Faster Pussycat, everyone was sort of doing their riff on the Steven Tyler thing, which was, you know, Steven Tyler was originally a drummer. So a lot of those like scat vocals that he does are really him just singing drum fills. So he's like, you know,
yeah,
that's really just a drum going, you know what I mean? And so like I started kind of learning like, oh shit, he's just jumping up to like a head voice, throwing some distortion on and doing a fucking drum fill. So like that whole thing. So like when we covered Draw the Line, I made sure not only did we get the riff right and the slide guitar, but I wanted to get that vocal part, you know, when he's like, you know, you know, that whole, I can't do it right now. I'm just saying like, you know, on a good day, I can hit all that stuff. And I was feeling like, I got to do it. I'm not going to cop out on it. If we're doing Aerosmith, I got to hit those parts. You know what I'm saying?
I love,
and I'm faithful like that. Like sometimes we do songs our own way, but sometimes I'm just like, no, man, we're doing Aerosmith. Let's try to sound like Aerosmith. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the covers are faithful. Then I look at
some we mess around with, but everyone's, you know, we mess around. It just, I don't know. It just, if I feel like if we can pull it off sounding kind of like what the band, you know, like our version of what the band did, then we do that. If it feels like it's a stretch or something, that may or I have some unique idea, then maybe we pull it in a different direction. But I'm like, you know, if you're doing Cheap Trick, like, you know, try to sound like Cheap Trick.
Well, Bob Seger System, Rambling Gambling Man.
Yeah, huge fan.
Faithful for the most part, but it also feels a little more ramshackle, perhaps.
Well, that's a live one from a radio show we did in Cleveland, I think. But yeah, so that one and Taxi Driver, a few of them are just live. Like the thing is, we didn't go as far as taking stuff off like bootlegs and live. Like, you know, if someone or even us brought a recorder in the room, of which we did many times, and we've got many cool recordings of us with famous, you know, rock stars doing cool shit. But a lot of those recordings are like, you know, someone just brought in like a Sony Pro Walkman, like, you know, a Walkman with a recorder essentially. So the quality is not that great. For this, because this is really our first kind of archival collection, I wanted the quality to be really good and everything. Yeah. So like we might do a part 2, maybe where it's the bootleg stuff. We also have so many, like for every album, we would record demos for the entire album. And then there's tons of songs sorry, that's my dog Mojo, that we didn't put out. So we've also thought about doing like all the demos and more. That was just like a 2-disc set of just like all the demos we ever did. But I don't know. We'll see if people enjoy what we just did enough that it warrants putting out a part 2. But yeah, I mean, we recorded a lot of stuff along the way, and it was a lot of like demos of what we were doing originally, and then covers, and the covers made it to this. So maybe the other stuff will make it somewhere else. You know, you never know.
A spot-on version of Sonic Reducer.
Yeah, that one's cool because that has Jimmy Zero from the Dead Boys, and we were on tour in Cleveland, where the Dead Boys are from, and Jimmy Zero at the time had a band called Lesbian Maker, and we played the Euclid Tavern, I believe. I think we did 2 gigs with them over a couple tours. But it was us and Wayne Kramer on tour, and we were also Wayne's backing band. So there was a while where we would do this thing with like Wayne and Sylvain and Jimmy and Cherie, where we would like tour with them, and the Cheetahs would do a support set of our original material or just whatever our set was at that time, and then we'd run backstage and change t-shirts and slug down a beer and then come back with the headliner and be the backing band. So for us, it was like 2 straight hours with maybe a 5-minute break of playing, or sometimes 2.5 if you were playing with Wayne and he felt like just going off. And it was so great because by the time you hit that second set, you were just like warmed up and ready to go.
Yeah.
Like I would do a whole Cheetahs set singing and playing guitar, but then when I would play with Wayne, I was just playing rhythm guitar, some leads, and some backing vocals, which is to say it was a little less high tension, than having to be the lead singer. So it was sort of like way fun because I was already warmed up, but I didn't have to do quite as much heavy lifting. You know what I mean?
I'm pretty sure as a musician that was the American dream right there, doing your own music and then playing with Wayne.
And then we would have, like, for instance, we went out with Wayne and then we hit Cleveland and Jimmy Zero joined us. So there was a jam we did that was us with Wayne and Jimmy Zero. And then the next morning we went into the studio and Jimmy produced and played on us doing Sonic Reducer. And then when we played with Wayne, there was all sorts of cool stuff. He was playing with Brian James from the Damned, so there was a lot of jams with Brian James and Dennis Tech from Radio Birdman, and we were playing with Cherie a lot. There was just a lot of cool rock people and legends that we were lucky enough to team up with or play or meet through other people, and just we were likable and young and drunk and enjoying ourselves, and people seemed to like hanging out with us or didn't mind that we hung out with them and played with them, and somehow we just wormed our way onto a lot of cool stuff. And I think a lot of it was just that we were enthusiastic and nice, like we would generally like talk to people, and we were nerdy and like we knew everything about their career, but we also weren't acting like fanboys. You know what I mean? Like I don't know, like there's a way that you can hang out with someone that you dig and like be a fan without being a fanboy, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Where you can be like, hey man, like they know, like, oh dude, like this fellow musician respects me and knows my shit and is asking me some detailed ass questions that show they've really been paying attention. And you can have that conversation in a way where you don't come off like a sycophant or like a super nerd. Like you can have that as a peer where even though I might be a young kid in my 20s back then talking to a legend like Wayne, but I'm also like on tour with him in his band in Missoula, Montana. And like, meaning he's given me a hall pass at this point. And now I can just ask him questions when they come to me and not feel weird that I'm asking. I can be like, hey man, Wayne, when you and Rob Tyner would do this, what was that like? And he would give me an answer, and we'd, like I get to hear these rad stories. And that was kind of like the bonus of being in the Cheetahs, really, was just like, we got a team with all these unbelievable rock icons. And like, for me, I got to spend time just like in a van or backstage, hanging out with them and asking all the questions I ever wanted to ask Cherie Currie or Bob Duro or Wayne Kramer or Sylvain or Dennis Tech or Jimmy Zero or Cheetah Chrome or whoever,
You mentioned the Stones and Alice Cooper as kind of those exemplars of bands who still inexplicably are at the top or the peak of their power, the peaks of their power in the present day. I would put Iron Maiden on that same list. I just saw them most recently a couple of weeks ago for like the 5th time, and they're still, I mean, Bruce Dickinson's voice is still operatic and blistering. The stage show with all the changes, amazing. And I bring this up because you cover a very early Maiden song in this collection. Again,
we started doing Sanctuary off the first Maiden record way back when, like back in the 90s. I mean, Maiden has always been, and Judas Priest too, I feel like those are metal bands that punks and Motorhead obviously would be like the pinnacle of that, but those are metal bands that even the most punk rock punks go, well, yeah, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, you may not like metal, but how do you not like Iron Maiden? It's just so rad. It's so cool, And I mean, I would say that's definitely a band that we all love, but like in the Cheetahs, Dino Everett, our bass player, he was always sort of the more faithful punk in the band. Like, he is a diehard Avengers fan and Crime fan, and he like actually when he was a teenager played with Gigi Allen. Like, he's like a real OG punk. I don't know that I would call myself a real punk like that. Don't get me wrong. I love a lot of punk rock music, and I have tons of punk rock records. Like, I've been listening to Fear since I was, 10 years old. Like I said, the Ramones, the New York Dolls, but I was always a little bit more on that kind of like proto 70s punk vibe, like the Runaways, Joan Jett and stuff. And I like some hardcore stuff, and I love a lot of like, thrash and stuff, but I wouldn't say that I was a hardcore punk the way that you think of it. I was really more of like a metalhead and a hard rock kid who also loved punk. So while Dino, and I say this because Dino and I and Art Jackson, we were the three guys that really started the band. Art's not in the band anymore, but he was an original member. And I was kind of a metalhead, so I was more on the Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Van Halen. Like, I'm a Rat fan. I love Black and Blue. I love Armored Saint. Don't get me wrong. My all-time favorite band is the Stones. I love Al Green. I love Parliament Funkadelic. I'm not saying like I'm just a metalhead. I have a big, wide variety of tastes, especially now as an older man as opposed to a kid. I have an appreciation for I'm a big jazz fan, blah, blah, blah. But, growing up, I was a metalhead and Dino was a punk, and Art was probably somewhere in between. And so when the band formed, we very much embraced all sides of this. And Dino was a punk who loved metal, and I was a metalhead who loved punk. So it didn't seem like we were reinventing the wheel by covering both Iron Maiden and the Dead Boys. It felt like, you kind of play them around the same tempo and you're going to be fine. They just, they're rock and roll songs, and especially the early Maiden with Paul Di'Anno is a lot more punk rock than the later Maiden stuff, which maybe gets into a bit more proggy territory,
Yeah, it was scrappier.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with you. Maiden is just a killer, amazing, incredible band. I'm really excited that Judas Priest got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Not that I'm necessarily a big, subscriber that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is like the be all end all, but I like it when like hardcore, hard metal.
You want your team to win. Yeah.
And I liked it when NWA got in. Like, I mean, meaning I like it when hard edged music gets respect from the mainstream. So, anytime like a metal band or something just really edgy squeaks its way in there, I'm like, yeah.
So now we wait for Iron Maiden.
I mean, that seems like next. I mean, and honestly, they've sold a lot of records and they're very relevant now. I mean, more than any concert this year, like when Maiden played, every single person I know went to that show. I feel like they're still very relevant. So,
well, and you want to talk for how instructive are they as learning how to brand your band? That's a masterclass in branding.
Absolutely. They're just a great band. I mean, and also the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in particular is so much about record sales, and Iron Maiden has sold a lot of records. Like, they're not, you know what I mean? It's not like they're not fringe anymore. I mean, when you go to see their show, it's almost like the metal version of Disney on Ice at this point, in that it is a big show. Yeah. It's a production, and the reason why they can afford to do that kind of production on the road like this is because they sell a lot of records, and they are a big A-list act at this point. I mean, maybe you could argue for a long time the Maiden was a fringe thing, but like, not now.
Nope.
They are a big band. They're at Sabbath, Ozzy level. Like, they're as big, right up there with Metallica. Like, they are doing a big, massive show that has, production value. It's not just a heavy metal concert,
You just named the other one that I think is a head scratcher for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Ozzy solo. Not inducted.
For sure. I mean, personally, I'm a Sabbath nut. I love those first two Ozzy records with Randy. To me, are just the greatest. I'm kind of hit and miss with the rest of his stuff, but no doubt that he's a legend and a great singer and songwriter and performer. And I mean, man, the Sabbath stuff is untouchably incredible, and those two records with Randy they're almost like the blueprint of pop metal. I feel like Rat and Def Leppard and Quiet Riot and all the stuff that came right after it, you could kind of make, certainly Van Halen, there's a couple other people that were doing like that sort of combination of like heavy metal guitar with really pop hooks. There were certainly other people doing it, but when you listen to those first two Ozzy records, like, that is the blueprint of heavy metal on the radio for the next decade.
Just earlier this evening, before our conversation, my son was cooking dinner. He's in culinary school, and he was listening to Over the Mountain as he was cooking. I'm like, Oh, this gives me hope. Like I was smiling broadly as I
My
walked in the
daughter
room.
is 19 and she's a sophomore in college. She's also a big cook. And she also loves Black Sabbath and early Ozzy. So we're raising good kids. We're doing the right thing here.
That's right. Now, controversial opinion. I may like the Dio Sabbath more than Ozzy Sabbath.
I had that argument with Ahmet Zappa. We were talking about the Kiss Cruise earlier, and he and I had that argument. And he makes, as I'm sure you would, the case that in 2 albums,
Heaven and Hell and the Mob Rules.
arguably, yeah, I mean, because they did more stuff, you know, and then the band Heaven and Hell. But like in those 2 albums that they essentially said everything that Ozzy managed to say over the course of the 8 albums, and that there's not a bad song on those 2 albums. Now, I agree that those are 2 absolutely amazing records. For me personally, I'm more of an Ozzy guy than a Dio guy. I don't know why, but I would just say that Dio always had a little bit of that rock opera kind of vibe in his voice, and Ozzy to me always kind of sounds like just a melodic rock and roll singer. Don't get me wrong, later Ozzy, the way his voice is now, it's very processed and it's very, but like back in the day, Ozzy was just a rock and roll singer with a really, really good like melodic voice when he would go there. So for me, I'm an Ozzy guy, but don't get me wrong, you cannot understate the magical majesty and swordsmanship of a lyrical prowess of the cauldron of dragons and dungeons and mighty warlocks that is Ronnie James Dio. And my buddy Amit would tell you, if I said anything short of Dio as God, then I would be stricken down by the metal gods themselves, which of course we know as Rob Halford. So
Clearly, again, the compilation, all the covers and more, not on vinyl.
No, not yet. Although we're in talks with the label right now. I won't reveal it quite yet, but to do a vinyl version, but it'll be a 1 album version that is essentially all these short songs. And I say that because if you've looked at the time length as 2 CDs, they both clock in around 72, 74 minutes. So in order to do, and by the way, the gauntlet has been drawn. Like any label that wants to do a 4 album disc, 4 vinyl, I'm into it. Like you just reach out to me, we're down. But the reality is no one has the cojones of steel. You would have to carry your balls in a wheelbarrow to do the 4 album, version. So in lieu of that, this label we're talking to is going to basically take off all the super long jams with Wayne Kramer and Sylvain and all that jazz, and like just put out kind of like the shorter punk rock stuff and make like a 1 album version. So we'll be on vinyl soon.
Brilliant.
Right now it's just CD.
Brilliant. And people can stream it. Obviously, they can also, like you said, get it on glistening compact disc.
Yeah, the label we did this record with is called Rumbar. It's a great label, East Coast, Boston-based label. A guy named Lou runs it. Really good. They love music. They're just big music fans. They're in it for all the right reasons. Like, these days there's not a lot of labels that are just committed to putting out rock and roll records, and the ones that are doing it are generally doing it because they love it.
Yeah.
And they're fans, just like we've been talking about. Like, we're fans of this. This is why we do it. This is why I do it. So we were lucky enough to hook up with this label, and they were fans of the band, and I ran this idea by them, and they were into it, and we're talking about doing more stuff with them. Really, really big fans of them. And we've been doing this for a while, which is to say that like we're kind of in a nice position where like we're not a huge band by any means, but the Streetwalkin Cheetahs have been around for 25 years now, and there's a lot of people that were fans of us that now run record labels. And so there's people that are into the idea of putting out some new music or some archival stuff, of which we have plenty of both. So we found an audience and a sort of home in these different indie labels in Europe and the States for us to do that. And then, my whole thing is, at some point I branched off from the Cheetahs and kind of started my own career. So I did a record with Eddie Spaghetti from the Super Suckers last year called Motherfucking Rock and Roll. It was kind of like those old records when like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson would like 2 outlaw, country guys hook up and do a record together. We made like our outlaw country rock and roll record. And then I met these guys from the band Warrior Soul and City Kids in the UK, and we started a band based out of Copenhagen called Trading Aces. I've got a blues band called Highway 61. I record with James Williamson from the Stooges, this heavy metal guy out of Canada called Thor, Cherie Curry from the Runaways, and I have some new
Thor.
stuff. Yeah, Thor. And so, my whole thing is just I've got, and then I've, and all this stuff, like a lot of it's on labels, a lot of it's on my Bandcamp. You can just go to the Bandcamp or the social media for any of my projects. But my whole thing is just like, I'm a songwriter. I write songs in lots of different zones. There's metal, there's punk, there's rock and roll, there's country, there's blues. And I just keep trying to like move forward and just keep writing and putting out stuff. I also write books and I make movies. I've directed 3 documentary films and written 8 books. And so my whole thing is I just keep like making art. I just keep making art and moving forward.
You mentioned Eddie Spaghetti. The first time I saw Super Suckers was the weirdest. They were touring with White Zombie in the mid-90s, which was not a perfect fit. I don't know that the White Zombie fans knew
probably not. Yeah, Eddie's a lot of Eddie's career is the Super Suckers being paired up with bands that is not a perfect fit, but that's what makes him such a fucking rad outlaw,
Totally. All right. See, you mentioned all the other stuff you do as an author, producer, documentarian, director. All this is to say, and based on this conversation, you're a storyteller. That's what you do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What makes the music industry worthy of telling stories, or good subjects, I should say?
Well, there's all sorts of ways that you can tell stories. And so when I do a documentary film or a book, for instance, and I would say in those realms, I generally am a nonfiction person. So I don't do a lot of I don't write books where I just come up with a fanciful idea. I wrote like a history of the Ramones, or I ghost wrote worked with Dave Mustaine from Megadeth on one of his books. I did I partnered up with Monty Melnick, the tour manager of the Ramones, helped him tell his story. So I do a lot of nonfiction stuff. And when you're doing nonfiction, like a documentary film or a book, you're there to serve the best telling of that story. So my voice is not as important in that. I might, as a professional writer who can sometimes frame stuff or might be like the narrative voice or something, I might jump in there, but I'm almost helping other people I'm helping them achieve their voice and tell their story. And so I'm a co-author or sort of a narrator or a supporter or whatever you call it, ghostwriter. It depends on the gig. And when you're doing a documentary, it's that same kind of thing. Like, it's a bit of a fly on the wall thing. It's my opinion is not as valuable beyond just what's the best way to keep this all moving forward and to tell or capture this story. And that's one way to tell a story, and that's a longer form way in the sense that when you're doing a book or a movie, that's going to be like a 90-minute experience, or if you're reading a book, maybe a 3, 4, 5, 6 hour experience, whatever. And you have that room to breathe a little bit. When you're writing a song, for one thing, you don't really have to worry about the definition of fiction and nonfiction. Mm-hmm. It's all I can write a song that's both simultaneously. Yeah, this is a song about me robbing a bank, but it's kind of about my marriage. You know what I mean? You can do whatever. You could write a song like Wooly Bully that just means nothing and it's just nonsense, but somehow just Baba Ooh Mau Mau. I mean, like that doesn't mean anything. There's all these great 60s songs, Louie Louie, that just don't mean anything, but they're like incredible because sometimes it's just the phrasing of the word and the energy. And then sometimes you've got a Bob Dylan or a Springsteen who tells these beautiful poetic stories, like a Patti Smith. And then you've got guys like Didi Ramone who could just summarize all these complex emotions in like 4 words, and then just repeat those 4 words. And then when you get the next verse, just go, second verse, same as the first, which is like the greatest second verse ever.
It is.
You know what I mean? So like, there's so many ways when you're writing songs. There's so many voices you can take, and there's so many ways to interpret it. And you can write a 2-minute song or a 20-minute song, and it can be steeped in nonfiction or fiction. So what I love about songwriting is that it forces you to be very compact.
Mhm.
Now, even if your compact idea is 8 minutes long versus 30 seconds long, and if you're in DRI, you might write a 30-second hardcore song. If you're in Emerson, Lake and Palmer, you might write an 8-minute long prog opus. Both of those have meaning and have weight, and like in my mind, I'm like, well, I mean, I'd like to think now I'm 51 years old. At this point in the game, I could go in either direction. It's more like, what's my idea?
Mhm.
So I kind of feel like this whole journey to me has just been about being able to take the ideas in my brain or the ideas that I come up with collaborating with other artists and weirdos like me, and then be able to sort of perfectly execute them either on stage or in the studio and get those ideas out so that then me as a nerdy rock fan can like listen to them and go, oh yeah, that's cool. This song reminds me of the New York Dolls meets Cheap Trick meets Zappa, the way that I thought in my head. Because every time you write a song or make a movie or write a book, you're kind of like just pulling influences. You know what I mean? When I write a song, I'm like, oh, this is kind of like that Rick Springfield line, but with like a little Cheap Trick, and then it kind of does a little rat thing, and then it's like DRI. You know what I mean? And then like when I'm making a movie, I'm making directed a movie about this movie called Risen, the story of Sharon Hellraiser Smith, and it's about a Wu-Tang Clan rapper who had a brain aneurysm and lost the whole left side of his body and had to like relearn to rap and walk and talk and all this stuff. And like when I'm in that zone, I'm not taking the driver's seat and pushing the idea and the creative. I'm taking the back seat and letting him or his life, or whatever, he's sort of pushing the creative, you know what I mean, or pushing the narrative, and I'm just there as a fly on the wall. So I always feel like it's the same reason why in the Cheetahs I can be the lead singer, but in Sharik Curry's band I'm the rhythm guitar player or the co-songwriter. Like sometimes you gotta be the quarterback and sometimes you're the wide receiver.
Listening to you talk about music in general over this conversation, and just
by the way, my wife, I just got married 3 weeks ago, would be so thrilled at the football analogy that I just did, because I'm so not a sports guy, but I've been watching a lot more football, since I met her, and of course now that I'm married. And I've made a few casual football references recently, and she's like, "Oh, I'm getting in there. I'm getting in that head."
Yeah. I think we're all proud of you, Frank.
Thanks,
but listen to you talk about music and just the depth of music and the enthusiasm, the passion you have for music, and then hearing you mention DRI and Emerson, Lake and Palmer in the same sentence reminds me of for me was the most liberating thing I experienced 10, 20 years ago. Getting rid of the idea that there are guilty pleasures in music and just liking the shit you like. And I think people get so hung up. You can love a Rick Springfield song. You could be all about the Working Class Dog album, but also listen to Discipline by King Crimson or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been a huge hip hop fan for a long, long time, and there's no evidence of that in my rock music, because I just don't feel like it belongs in there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Meaning that's if that influence shows, it shows when I'm making my documentaries about hip hop artists, of which I've made 2 now. But I've always loved that and found a real energy and creative sort of inspiration from hip hop. But I'm not a guy who feels like I need to then go make a rap rock record or start rapping. It's more like I just kind of have always loved, this music from when I heard Public Enemy as a kid. I just I loved it. It means something to me and it connects with me. And I've done a lot of storytelling in the hip hop world as a musician and also as a documentarian, but I don't feel the need to mix it with my rock and roll. And some people do, and that's fine. It's just that to me, I have these different sides of my personality. I'm a big blues guy, and other than maybe some licks in my guitar playing, I don't necessarily feel like you'd hear the tremendous Buddy Guy influence in my overall musicianship or the John Lee Hooker influence, because it's just, there's ways I could probably hear it seeping in there, but for the most part, it's just not necessarily appropriate within the Streetwalkin Cheetahs world. But it takes all these different things to. I'm a huge Olivia Newton-John fan. I'm a huge Donna Summer fan. Huge. My wife and I went and saw Diana Ross recently in concert. I fucking love Motown and soul.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
60s pop and 70s pop. Like I told you, I'm a huge hip hop fan. Like I have a lot of influences that are just not evident in my music because if you're doing Dead Boys rock and roll, it's just not appropriate to bring in your Sun Ra influence. Although it actually kind of is.
Maybe.
That wasn't a good example because actually the Cheetahs do a fair amount of bringing in punk and freeform jazz together. But you know what I'm saying? Like you can compartmentalize. Like you can be a music fan. Like you were saying, like there's no guilty pleasures. Like I was telling you about Tommy Thayer from Kiss. Like I non-ironically love his 80s band Black and Blue. I'm a huge fan of Armored Saint, who used to dress in armor and wield swords and play metal, but I like them now. I like their current album. God damn it. You know what I mean? Like I'm a fan of the stuff that I like. I will ride or die with that stuff till the day they stop making music. If John Bush is singing a metal song, I'm buying that record. Like, cause that guy, you know, he's to me like, that's the singer of Armored Saint, who also was in Anthrax.
Right.
But like, you know, to me, like that guy, if he's making a record, I want to hear it.
I think Safe Home, an Anthrax song from the early aughts that John Bush was on, was a fantastic single that should have been a big deal.
I just think, I agree with you. And I just think he's one of those guys. And I could name a lot of musicians like this where, you know, look, I understand that like, you know, Saxon influenced power metal may not be the hippest thing, you know, to like with the kids, whatever the kids are. But I'm just saying, like, I love that music. And when I hear it done right, it really means something to me. And a guy like John Bush, for instance, and there's a lot of musicians we could have this conversation about, but just because we brought him up, like that guy has faithfully been a great metal singer for a long time. And when I listen to metal, the way my voice is, like if I sing metal, like when I write for Thor or I sing with Thor, or I had a band called the Dobermen, which was me and guys from Gacy DC and Pansy Division and stuff. And we were doing kind of like metal. And like or Trading Aces even does some metal stuff, my band in Copenhagen. When you hear me sing metal, I'm singing like John Bush. Like that's just me doing John Bush. Like that is my brain just processes, because my voice is very much in that same pocket as his, and I can kind of do some of the same stuff. So like I just sing like John Bush. So I have sort of zones, you know, and that's what we're saying. Like when I sing punk, I there's like 2 or 3 guys that I in my head I go like I'm just sort of doing those guys. When I'm singing pop, I'm doing Robin Zander. When I'm singing metal, I'm doing John Bush. You know, and that's like, I don't know if that's a cool answer, but like you said, like we love what we love. Like I don't feel weird about it anymore. Like I love what I love, and like I don't care that I think MC Ren was the greatest rapper in NWA. Like, sorry, I just think it.
You mentioned the blues, and you also mentioned the term guitar lick. I sometimes, as a non-player, even though I did take a year of Fender play during the pandemic, I sometimes,
by the way, you know, I directed a lot of those videos. For a long
I know,
time.
that's why I bring it up.
Yeah.
But right. I sometimes confuse riff and lick. So, for instance, Smokestack Lightning, is that a riff or a lick?
That's a riff. Generally, the way to differentiate. So, the background you were just saying. So, I worked my normal job away from being a rock and roll songwriter and singer and guitar player is I'm a director, and I've directed a bunch of documentary movies, and I've written a bunch of books, but that's sort of in the same zone as being a director. And I've directed for a lot of digital companies. So I worked for Fender, and for about 4 years, like right before they started Fender Play, and I had a lot to do with what Fender Play was from a video and production angle. I worked, you know, I directed these digital videos, and then I went on to a company called Tonal, which is like digital weightlifting. It's sort of like the digital weightlifting, what Peloton is to cycling and digital, you know. Yeah. So this is, you've seen the commercials with LeBron and Serena and stuff. So I direct a lot of those videos as well. And a lot of my experience as a musician and being on camera and, you know, has informed me being behind the camera. So that's what I do is I write books and I direct and stuff. And God, I forgot what your question was. I went off on a second there. Sorry. I
riff
versus lick, which is to say that I don't even know why I went down that path. But going back to Fender. So for a long time I directed Fender stuff, and this question came up often in the world of Fender, which is what's the difference between a lick and a riff? And here's, sorry to go off track there. Here's the difference. To me, a riff is like the beginning of the song or the memorable part of the song that is not necessarily part of a vocal. So in My Sharona, dun 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 dun, you know what I mean? In Whip It, dun 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 dun. In Living After Midnight, dun 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 dun. It's that part of the song that sort of starts it off, gives you the personality of the song, sometimes hints at the melody or the chorus, but sort of encapsulates what the song is going to be before the vocal even comes in. That's basically what a riff is. A lick is more like a melody line. So a lick would be like in Running with the Devil, the lick is da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. The riff would be gang.
Yep. Okay.
You know what I mean? Meaning the song starts off with the riff, that dun dun over the bass line. That tells you what the song's about. But then all of a sudden there's this melody line. That's kind of the difference. Running with the Devil is the perfect example of the difference between a lick and a riff, and that is it. And so one is essentially a melody line that often hints at the vocal line or the main melody, but not always. Like in Running with the Devil, it's not the melody line. It's just sort of a complementary part that complements it and fits in, but it's just as memorable as the vocal line. So it serves as an additional melody line, essentially. And so that's really, and so a lot of times people will confuse a guitar solo with the lick. A guitar solo is a collection of licks. But the difference is that a lot of guitar solos are improvised. And so if you're lucky and you're an Eddie Van Halen or an Eric Clapton or whatever, you might, like Mark Knopfler or, Pink Floyd, perfect example. Like the guitar lines are so melodic that, these licks become like memorable melodic things that you remember. Whereas if you listen to Yngwie Malmsteen, it's just a flurry of notes and you're not necessarily walking away. So like a guitar solo is sort of an opportunity for the soloist in the band to either remind you of the melody line or encapsulate kind of like a version of the melody line, but instrumentally. Or if they're just shredding, it's just a chance for them to break away from the melody line and do something dazzling or interesting. You know what I mean?
That was really well articulated. That was exactly the answer I was looking for. Thank you for that. All right. So to take it back to Streetwalkin Cheetahs, all the covers and more, it is a collection of 38 covers. This is foundational rock and roll stuff, foundational punk rock. It's stuff that'll stir everything inside of you. You can get it on CD. You can stream it. It's awesome. And in theory, we'll be getting a condensed digest version on vinyl in months to come.
I would like to see that happen because I'm a big vinyl guy, so I like vinyl.
How can you not be? I mean, we're of comparable age and interest. I would imagine you have a nice little record collection.
Yeah, I sure do. It's right over here.
Awesome. All right, Streetwalkin Cheetahs. Love the band. Even the studio album, the most recent one, is right behind me. That sounds awesome.
Thanks,
man. You guys are great. I really appreciate talking to you tonight.
Thank you, man. Yeah, that last record, One More Drink, came out on Deadbeat Records, and that was like our first studio record in many, many years. And it's actually it might be the only record we've ever done with no covers. And I think it was just because we had not made a record in so long that we were like, well, let's come out and remind people that we can actually write songs as well. But then we immediately followed it up with 2 discs of an unbelievable amount of covers. So, the bottom line is, like you said at the beginning of this interview, is that we wear our influences on our sleeves. So I think people that like, reckless chainsaw rock and roll, whether it's metal or punk or Bob Seger or whatever, are going to dig what we do. And if you're someone who's on the social medias, on Instagram, we're the Streetwalkin Cheetahs. On Facebook, the Streetwalkin Cheetahs. You can look me up as the Frank Meyer on Instagram, or Frank M. Meyer, just Frank Meyer. I've got a bunch of Facebooks and stuff. So yeah, when we're out there just making more music, man, I'm doing this year. I'm going to make another record with Eddie Spaghetti. The Cheetahs are heading into the studio to do another record. I'm doing a record with Trading Aces, which is my Copenhagen band. I did a record with them that's coming out in a few months, and I just made an album with this blues band, Highway 61, that I started in the 90s and finally got back together and knocked out a record. So this year I've got 4 albums coming out, which, believe it or not, for me is sort of a slow year. Normally I tend to operate between the 2 and 8 albums a year clip. So
and then there's
this year there'll be like 4.
And then there's the mystery unnamed whatever you were doing with Ahmet Zappa.
Yes, and then there's this TV thing with Ahmet Zappa, but Ahmet and I go way back, man. I could tell you, dude, I grew up in the Frank Zappa house. Like, I could tell you, we could do a whole separate podcast about my years at the Zappa household, the Zappa compound. And Ahmet is a great guy, man. I love that guy. He's one of the funniest. He is one of the funniest, most genuine people I know. I really, really love that guy.
Awesome. All right, Frank, I appreciate you doing this.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.